Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to be here, and I'd like to thank for inviting me to talk to you. The integration of the psychedelic experience. Before we begin, I'd like to share the story of how I came to this topic. Earlier this year, I was asked to speak about the history of the SAPT, the Swiss Medical Association for Psycholytic Therapy that Vincent mentioned. And I got in touch with one of the founders of the society, Jörg Walter Roth, a Bernese psychiatrist who is now retired, to ask him about the history because I didn't know much of the details. And then we came to talk about the fact that he had had licenses in the 80s to 93 for, believe it or not, LSD, mescaline, MDMA, and psilocybin. He was one of two people in Switzerland who had these licenses. Nobody knew, and he worked with them, these substances, in his private practice. Then in 93, he gave back the licenses, and I asked him, why the hell did you do this? I couldn't figure it out, and he said he was disillusioned and disappointed by the long-term effects of these therapies. Wow. This made me think, and this made me choose this topic today. So, my hunch is that it has to do with the integration. We all know that psychedelics can change your mind, but how about the transfer into daily life? I think the most important and almost most neglected part of the psychedelic experience is the integration. And I talked a lot with people about this. I talked a lot with my wife, Verena, and at some point she said, come on, instead of thinking and reading, talk to the people who experience this. Ask your patients. So I did this. I conceived a small survey. And in the first part of my talk today, I'll give you quotes. I'll let the patients speak about how they think and experienced their integration processes while taking psychedelics. And in the second part, I'll give a short overview of my clinical observations. At this point, I'd like to point out that I am basically a clinician and not a researcher. So I will talk out of this perspective, and part of this perspective is also the patient perspective. So the survey was with former patients, a few therapist colleagues, and also psychonauts that we know. I sent 45 emails and got 21 written answers back, and performed 5 video call interviews with people who didn't want to write. This was between August and September 23, and all were people who had a long time experiences with psychedelics. There were even 1 or 2 people who had experienced the time of permission in Switzerland, where they were in therapy between 88 and 93 with psychedelics. These are the questions, mainly 3 types of questions. I wanted to know what they think, how it works. How does integration work? And the second part is which contents are important and which were integrated by themselves automatically, which ones could they handle by their own efforts, and which ones needed help from the outside, and what weren't they able to integrate. Then the third part is which tools and what is needed for a successful integration, for example, music. So I'll go through the answers. The icons mark the first one, 3 identical or similar answers represented by typical quotes in order of the frequency of mentions, and the empty bullet are only 1 or 2, 3 answers, and the third icon is my comments. And let's listen to what people have to say about this. So the first question, how does the integration of psychedelic experiences function in your experience? What did you notice? The first quote, a therapeutic or guided framework is very helpful for beginners and facilitates both the psychedelic experience and its integration. After multiple experiences, the process generally becomes smoother and you can manage more and more on your own. More than half of the people said this. So it seems that we need an introduction to this kind of therapy by experienced guides or therapists. Second quote, integration is a dual process, an automatic or unconscious part and an active part needing conscious action. Please keep this in mind. We'll come back to that. Third quote, integration is a learning and also a reset process. The training of the emotional regulation capacity, a reset of acquired thoughts, patterns, beliefs, and a learning of new behaviors. True. The basis of integration is a sustained and improved and expanded perception and presence. This allows for a different interpretation of everyday situations and context. Next one. Integration is also a collective healing process. We know from conventional therapy that if one family member goes into therapies, this changes the whole family system eventually if the therapy is successful. This also is the case in psychedelic therapy, sometimes even more dramatically. If the psychedelic experience reveals a truth of the heart, you can say yes to. The subsequent integration is easier, clearer, life becomes more joyful, lighter, and less fearful. I've observed this too. The psychedelic experience focuses on certain issues, and then the corresponding situations appear in daily life. Is that true? I think it's a focus of perception that leads to a better perception of problematic situations in everyday life and the challenge to change them then. If it is possible to get in contact with suffering, fear, pain, and sadness under psychedelics, then this is also possible in daily life. Yes, that leads to the question of desensitization and to going through, not only under the influence of psychedelics, going through emotionally problematic situations in daily life. So, which parts of the psychedelic experience were integrated by themselves? Some previous symptoms, such as hypervigilance, pain, palpitations, depression, fears, physical tension, etc., disappeared after the psychedelic experience. We all know this, and patients are very grateful for this kind of symptom reduction. The reconnection with love, self-acceptance, trust, and the feeling of being secure was basically there again right away. But it took several experiences before the connection remained stable. Obviously, we have to learn this again once we were disconnected years or decades ago. And psychedelics can help you there. All experiences that touch the heart, mind, and body at the same time were integrated immediately and very peacefully. Okay? Issues that had been pre-processed and were close to consciousness were integrated easily and by themselves. This sheds a light on going to therapy before and being aware of one's own problems and having a sort of a clue of where the trip could go. Which ones could you handle by yourself? Which parts of the psychedelic experience? I was able to integrate the major part of the experiences, over 80%, on my own through my own efforts. I looked at these answers. There were several who said this, and this figure of 80% rises to the 80% with the experience of the person. So the more inexperienced people were, the lower this figure was. Spiritual experiences took their time to understand and integrate. The improvement of self-care required repeated efforts and much practice. You all know that seriously ill people lack self-care skills, and this, in my opinion, is an important part of integration, to teach people or to support them in developing better self-care skills, like looking to their body, getting enough sleep, having healthy relationships, etc., etc. Third part of this question, which ones needed help from the outside? The integration of overwhelming emotions or emotions that were difficult to bear needed therapeutic help, especially in the beginning of therapy. I can confirm that. People learn to endure difficult emotions over multiple sessions. Emotionally and overwhelming traumatic events from early childhood that the mind could not grasp could only be processed and integrated with therapeutic help. I agree completely with that. That matches my experience. In particular, very painful and shameful experiences required the witnessing and support from others. This is especially the case in group psychedelic therapy, where the group is very helpful to overcome such situations. Things I had to face and couldn't accept. My conclusions to that is that especially interpersonal, emotionally highly charged traumas seem to need a therapeutic counterpart and context to be processed properly. You can't do this on your own. What have you not been able to integrate? The issues where you see and feel something but cannot open up to it, resist it, or do not dare to look, where you are not honest with yourself and keep everything to yourself. The question of honesty and resistance. I like this one particularly. Some issues are simply life issues that need a lot of work and practice. They come up again and again in new facets. For example, self-esteem problems, sensitivity to criticism, and all that. And I have observed in long-term patients how they struggle with these things despite psychedelic therapy over years and years and years, and suddenly they're gone. This also happens. My black and white thinking, which sees everything in terms of victims and perpetrators, persists. As I've said, they have the character of life issues. They are longer periods of stagnation, and then there are small steps of improvement, and after many years, these problems can suddenly disappear. Obviously, they have been processed over time, over lengthier time periods. We come to the tools. What is required for successful integration? Slow down, take your time and space for integration, be perseverant and patient. The psychedelic experience is a fleeting thing. You have to absorb it actively. If you don't pay attention to the integration part of the psychedelic experiences, it sort of fades away. It's like remembering dreams. If you don't write them down, they're gone after a day or two. Commitment and willingness to change. The courage to be honest with yourself, to face the truth and make decisions. My conclusion, integration is a long-term active process that requires an attitude of trust, to be courage and determined, to be perseverant and honest. What and or who helped you with the integration? Sorry, there's slide is not properly made. The day after, the sharing with the group and the therapist or close one is essential and very, very helpful. Integrative psychotherapy, integration circles, talking to other people seems to be one of the important things in integrating psychedelic experiences. Cultivating acceptance, questioning yourself, and taking on responsibility for your problems and your life. Buddhist psychology. I suppose Vanya will tell us more about that in the following talk. Confusion is scary but helpful and forces you to take a new look at yourself and at your life. So it's not always an adverse event. It can be also a next step into rearranging your inner life and your exterior life. I wanted to know if artistic expression or writing, journaling was helpful. Almost everybody said or wrote, writing a report of the psychedelic experience in a timely manner is important and helpful. They also cite writing is a memory aid. A report is also a contemporary document that I can read years later and see what kind of progress I have made in the meantime. A written report forces you to express yourself verbally and not turn it to one side of the head and the other all the time. And I noticed that those who like to write in everyday life, for example, keeping a diary, or write a lot, professionally have less trouble with writing are more likely to use this resource. The same applies to artistic expression, like drawing or painting. My favorite, what role does music play in integration? I'd say of those 26 answers, there were 24 that said this: music reactivates emotions from the experience and facilitates integration and allows you to tune into the psychedelic experience later. I have to say to this that in our sessions we always give a playlist, earlier a CD, to the people home so they can listen to the music that was played during the sessions. In the beginning, music was an important tool in the integration process. As I gained more experience, I didn't need it so much anymore. My comment? It was almost unanimously used as an integrative tool to reactivate the atmosphere from the sessions and the emotions and to drive integration forward. And the last question, any other observations or insights? Integration takes a lot of time. This was stressed by almost all the patients and people I asked. And one person said the most effective form of integration I've experienced is in week-long retreats. One should invest a lot of time in integration, especially while one is still in an open, softened state. And the sustainability of the integration will only become evident over a longer period of time. I like this quote especially. Psychedelics sent me on a journey through life. I am convinced that I will continue to become more and more aware of myself and the world and embrace it all. It is a lifetime of integration, so to speak. So, let me come to the overview of integration. This is my definition of what integration of a psychedelic experience could or should be. Integration is to coherently embed the cognitive, emotional, physical and spiritual experiences and insights of the psychedelic experience into the field of consciousness, to derive changes in all dimensions of being and to implement them in everyday life with the goals of healing, achieving greater acceptance of the unchangeable, and enhancing capacity for love, mindfulness, compassion, and freedom. While I was reading about psychedelic integration, I came across the book by Mark Aishala, Psychedelic Integration, was mentioned yesterday by Abigail. And he says there are 7 dimensions of integration. And I find it helpful to think in these 7 dimensions when treating people and to not miss parts of it. Because most psychedelic experiences touch all these 7 dimensions. I'd like to go into especially the temporal dimensions. The prerequisites for successful integration is a correct screening. You have to know about who you're going to accompany through a psychedelic experience. You have to screen for psychopathology, contraindications, and characteristics which could make difficult experience and complications more likely. Listen to what people tell about previous psychedelic experiences. And you have to find out about change motivation, expectations, and you have to be sure that a sound commitment is here. Choose the appropriate setting. Is a group or an individual setting better? Which format should one use? A one-day format, patient goes home at night, in the evening, or 3 or more days with overnight stays in the clinic. A good preparation is the basis for good integration. We should psychoeducate people about psychedelics. They should know what they can expect, what can happen, what cannot happen. For example, magical healings. They should have a notion of how their mind works. We should teach patients about that. Then, safety issues, keeping boundaries, and developing trust. Usually in trials, this is all done in a couple of sessions. In everyday psychiatric practice, we take much more time for this. And this leads to, in my opinion, better results. Less complications, less trouble. And last, the setting of goals and intentions. Years ago, we didn't use the tool of setting an intention. We just let things happen. We found out over time that setting an intention gives the experience a certain boundary and a certain direction and rails to hold on to. So that's useful, very useful. In my opinion, there are 4 phases of integration. This might be funny, but integration begins right after the peak of the experience. If you really watch yourself under psychedelics, you can see that after the peak, the issues and things, the content repeats itself that you had during the ascent to the peak. It comes back after the peak in different ways. You have to think about it. You start to rearrange the content so it becomes more coherent. And therefore, it is important to take a psychedelic experience to its end and not stop prematurely. So keep quiet, be introspective to the end of the effects. This may lead to longer sessions, but I think this is a good start for the post-session integration. The phase 2 consists of sharing on the day after with the group, the guides, the therapist. And we always ask the following questions. What have you understood? And what needs clarification right now? The second question is, what do you take home from this experience? And what do you want to implement into daily life? And we require patients to write down what they have experienced or express themselves through drawings or paintings. The early integration phase is 3 to 6 or more weeks in our experience, where there is still maybe an afterglow or a softened state where therapeutic work can be done and integration is driven forward. And then comes phase 4, the long-term integration, where people still work on these issues, on these contents of the psychedelic experience. And it's open-ended, as I said. I remember one patient who declared in the day after integration session, I want to stop smoking. I will stop smoking. She didn't mention a date. And in this survey, she said, several years after that last psychedelic session, it went like this, and she stopped smoking, and she knew, now I have decided to implement my decision of stopping to smoke. It could take so long. The path of change. There's an immediate phase, one, where physical changes, as I mentioned, hypervigilance, sleep, headaches go away, and I think they are related to a more harmonious sympathetic, parasympathetic balance, and other neurobiological changes, for example, a better mood. And the second part of the immediate changes is the openness that we all know that happens. Open in relationships, the opening of the heart, and the opening of the perception. These all can be reversible if they are not nurtured and cultivated. That can go away too, if you skip integration and go back to normal, whatever that was. In the middle phase, you deal with cognitive emotional integration. You have to integrate all those insights into the narrative of who you are and what's wrong with you and where you want to go. There's a phase of physical stabilization and integration. Some people are so relaxed that they need to learn how to deal with this new kind of relaxation, the loss of tension in the body. Then it is cautious to review far-reaching decisions such as separating, quitting your job, or moving to some other place before implementing. You know, there was, in the 80s, you could buy a T-shirt where it said on it, "Don't marry 6 weeks after ecstasy." So it's this kind of type of decisions that in a euphoric state you should think about it twice. Changing relationships and improving self-care is important. And one of the real challenges is initiating changing of habits and addictions. All our small addictions in everyday life, from smoking, sugar, social media, you know it all. These are hard to change. And often enough, having a witness and saying it to others helps to get it going. And this needs decisions. All these things need to be actively addressed. In the long term, these changes have to be consolidated, especially these habits you want to change. And long-term changes are the same as growth and the overall evolutionary process that we all are in. And to this long-term phase belongs the cultivating of mindfulness, of compassion, and a life-affirming, future-oriented lifestyle. There's a lot to integration, as you see, and it's not so easy. So where are the barriers to change? Here are examples of failed transfer integration into daily life in the 7 dimensions. One of the most common is not taking your time or skipping integration, rushing back to normal. For example, people on Sunday afternoon, on a weekend session, go to a family reunion where they jump into the usual chaos of these reunions, and this takes them completely out of integration and doesn't do any good. On the cognitive level, not wanting to accept new insights or truths, emotionally, continuous suppression of unwanted emotions, not allowing for sadness and pain that has arisen during the sessions. On the physical level, ignoring self-care, physical needs, sleep, boundaries. On the spiritual bypassing or denial of the spiritual dimension. And then not changing harmful habits, not taking action on insights on the behavioral level. And very important, not taking care of relationships that people have, refusing to get help, sticking to unhealthy relationships, and not communicating adequately. So this is a quote from one of our patients. In fact, it was a patient of my wife, Verena. She wrote, "Perception changes. The situations, encounters, and feelings of everyday life are interpreted differently. There is more awareness, presence, and mindfulness, instead of former automatisms, as well as more a comprehensive view of idiosyncrasies, one's own behaviors, and those of others, and certain repetitions. Also, something in everyday life suddenly and unexpectedly appears in a different light. A landscape is flooded with an unnameable mood. Everything flares up in divine beauty. Events appear in slow motion. The real sometimes seems to be a dream, and the dream another reality. The sensory channels are more open to messages through mindfulness. Dreams speak a clear symbolic language, the recognition of something long forgotten." So, my conclusion. Psychedelics can change your mind, but changing your life requires decisions and conscious action, and sometimes a little help from your friends. It's up to you. I'm not quite finished. Okay. I would like to thank the patients and psychonauts, colleagues and friends who answered to my survey. I would like to thank my wife, Verena Wittmer, who had the patience to talk this all through, and also to Jörg Walter Roth, who I respect greatly as a really good clinician. So, this is the final slide. Okay. It's not my fault. Okay. I'm really.
We definitely have time for some questions for whoever is interested. I don't know where the mic humans are right now. Okay, perfect.
Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. Very rich, and learned a lot of things. I was wondering if it would be a good idea to propose to your patient to establish a meditation practice or a self-compassion practice to help them integrate whatever they have learned in the sessions.
The question is if I've suggested these things to the patients. Yes, sometimes, yes. Usually, sometimes patients always ask us, do you think meditation is something for me? And the answer is, well, go and try. Find out by yourself. I support the notion that, for example, Buddhist psychology is of health to integrate and also to navigate the psychedelic experience.
Hi. Okay, thanks. So thank you, Mr. Oehen, for your work. I would like to know how your patients maybe dealt with critics of psychedelics from their friends and family that might react with anxiety or fear, if there were any.
If the family members are critical of psychedelic therapy, well, that's part of the preparation screening process to decide or to find out what the family thinks about this, what the spouse thinks about this. And I'm reluctant to take somebody on sessions if the spouse is completely disagrees with this. This can lead to trouble, but sometimes people just want to come and then we'll give it a try. And the second question was?
It was just that. So, like, how any of these critics could be maybe dealt with or like taken care of and integrated into the experience?
Yes, we also talk to the family members if they are critical of psychedelic therapy and see if their opinion can be changed and they can start supporting the person who wants to do a session. Mostly, it's not a problem because the suffering is so great that they will hold on to any help they can get. The famous straw. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your talk. My question is, do you have experience with like neurofeedback as a supportive tool for integration?
Neurofeedback. I use the cue ball. Do you know that? It's a feedback of the heart rate variability, which teaches people to relax. And some high tense people learn through this ball, which essentially leads to a downregulation of your heartbeat and an elevation of the heart rate variability. It's helpful sometimes. And earlier I had a breath feedback machine which was designed by Hans Karl Leuner. I use that sometimes. It's also to release tension, to learn to relax, but it was complicated and I'd abandoned that one. The cue ball is much easier to handle. They can take it home and practice at home. With other techniques, I don't have any experience.
Okay, thank you very much.
So I know not every patient comes in with a spiritual inclination or prior experience in alternative therapies. So would you say that spirituality is necessary for quality integration, or is it an intrinsic part of the psychedelic process?
Basically, it's always a part of psychedelic experience, but when people start out as patients, they are bothered by their symptoms, by what they suffer from, and our observations were that eventually, as things get better, the spiritual dimension opens up. And we deal with these accounts of mystical experience the way that we ask again and again, what does this mean for your daily life? How could this change your daily life? What conclusions do you take from this experience? We don't reinforce it, we don't deny it. They are in therapy and they have a goal of getting better. So,
hello, I was wondering, the colleague you mentioned in the beginning, the one who gave up his license because he was disappointed, what did he think of these results of yours, and what were the differences between his approach and what you've seen?
I didn't get your question. Can you repeat it?
You mentioned a colleague in the beginning, one who gave up his license, who was disappointed. And I was wondering what the differences were with his approach and your approach, and did you talk to him about this at the end?
We didn't talk about this yet. I will, because I hadn't figured it out yet. I think he was impatient. He didn't wait long enough to see how people develop over a longer period of time. We have heard frequently or several times that health betters over time, even when you do nothing or no therapy anymore. I think my colleague was too impatient. Or I have to ask him how he did integration work. I have to ask him more in detail.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for your presentation. You seem to have quite a broad clinical approach, and I was wondering if you'd had experience as well with like sort of similar experiential inner process focused approaches like hypnosis or EMDR, also involving some kind of altered consciousness state, and if so, how does it compare in your experience?
Yes, I began training in EMDR and did it sometime in my practice and integrated it. I've visited different therapy methods, looked into them, and over time, I developed my own style, integrating techniques and methods as I learned them. So I think a psychedelic therapist, should have a very large toolbox of methods at hand to help his patients. And Michael quoted Irvin Yalom, that for every patient, you have to invent psychotherapy again. You have to customize therapy, and it is helpful if you are able to draw upon a lot of techniques and methods as much as you can.
Okay, one more question, a short one.
So I want to say that, well, thank you for your work. It was deeply moving. And I also read your paper on group therapy with Peter Gassler, and it makes me think, so I have two questions. One, what are your thoughts on scalability? Someone said that psychedelic-assisted therapies are not scalable by definition, I once heard, but what are your thoughts on the possibility to provide it to bigger amounts of people? And the second question, mental health conditions, of course, and even depression is a mixed bag, and there are a lot of different types, and kind of reasons why people are depressed. Have you noticed any patterns in integration depending on the kind of the flavor of depression, if that makes sense?
I think treating depression or people who are depressed is more trying, and you have to be more patient because they tend to relapse over longer time, and they are more resistant to change. I can't say more than that to depression. We will see. I think the euphoria about treating depression with psilocybin is quite high, and the trials that are running will show what long-term effects can be achieved. Short-term effects, yes, and what about relapse and long-term effects and coming down from the medication? That's, I think, a big problem. And your first question again, please? I forgot that one.
Yes, it was about scalability, your thoughts about scaling this to offer it to, much higher amounts of people. Is it possible at all?
I don't know how to do it. We have this problem of money that the panels talked about yesterday. The financial compensation for this kind of therapy is bad. You don't get enough money to exist if you want to do this. We have to find forms like clinics that provide how do you say, the infrastructure for treating people. That's an idea that came up discussing this with colleagues. You have institutions where you as a therapist can go in, everything is there, food, a sound system, everything is good for groups, individuals, and you can go there with your patients, and you also have care over the night, something like that. But it is definitely a problem to be solved. I don't know, I don't have the solution yet. We will see.
Well, thank you for all the elaborate answers, and thank you for the good questions. And I ask you to once more applaud for Dr. Oehen.
Thank you.